Okay, I'm going to do page 18 and 19 together. 18 is basically just sliding the tank in, putting the tank insulators in, and I'm not going to do the fuel set, put in the fuel tubing and anything like that now. We'll do that later and go over that at a later time. So take your fuel bung, your fuel cap and the fuel line and stuff and set it aside for now, and we'll get to that later. But in the next two pages is where we're going to install the side frame, the tank. These are the tank insulator rubbers. There's aileron elevator bell cranks, the canopy support, or the canopy supports, another frame member, the screws, some standoffs, and some bearings and stuff like that. So I'll go ahead and get all this together, and just follow along in the manual as you're doing this. It's all laid out and everything's pretty well explained. Okay, now we've got the rear frame all assembled and attached to the skeletal system. Like I mentioned before, I'm not going to put this fuel tank stuff in just yet, so we're going to set this aside and we'll come back to that later. But just make sure you put something in the hole of the fuel tank so you don't get stuff in there while you're pushing this around and building it or whatever. But now we have our elevator crank on, and the key here is just make sure when this elevator crank is level that it's pointing down into the servo hole. You'll see when you turn it around there's different ways to mount it. We've got our aileron cranks on here. Now there's a spacer between the crank and the frame, and if you look on that, one side of that spacer has a ridge on it. That ridge points out from the frame and touches the bearing. That makes it so the assembly is riding on the inner race of the bearing. You don't want to have it the other way and have it pressing on the outer race of the bearing as well. We've got our canopy standoffs installed. Fuel tank insulators wrapped around there. You will have to cut those off a little bit, cut to fit. But other than that, that's the completed rear frame. We still got some more to do when we put the tail on here on the rear side of it, but we'll go over that when we get to it. For video purposes, I'm going to skip over the engine portion, and I'm going to go right up to the putting together the front frame assembly, and that starts on page 24, and then we'll come back later and we'll do the engine stuff. It's just easier that way. I don't have to muscle that engine around or whatever. Okay, now we're into page 24. We're going to start assembling the front frame. This the Radikal has a split frame. It allows you to pull the front radio trays and everything off to get easier access to mounting and unmounting the motor. It's really a pretty nice design. It works out well. It makes it easy to get the engine in and out, and if you need to adjust stuff or whatever. So now we're going to start the front part. This is the lower radio tray. This is the upper radio tray. Here's some cross members that these mount to. These are another part of the canopy mounting support system, and then the associated screws to put all this together. One thing you might find is you may have to trim this piece down for the canopy. It seems to hold the canopy down too low and hits the muffler pipe if you use the Century pipe. So you'll just kind of have to adjust that accordingly to make it so the pipe don't hit. If you don't do that, then you need to trim out that part of the canopy so that it doesn't hit the muffler and melt. So I'll go ahead and put this together, and we'll come back and take a look at the completed stuff. Alright, now we got the front trays all done up here. Got their associated frame members put on there and the front canopy mount there. And so now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be page 25, and that's going to be mounting the side frames to this stuff for the front part of the frame. Alright, we're at page 25 now. I'm going to continue to put the front frame set together. These are the parts that come out of that part of the bag. Two side frames. These are the parts from the previous step that we completed. Here's the screws to screw everything together. And then also in this part, in that bag, are some parts that we'll use when we install the main shaft. There's the thrust bearing that goes on the main shaft, the transmission pin, and a main shaft collar, and some stuff like that. So you're going to want to take this bag and set it aside for now and not lose it. So we'll get everything put together and come back and take a look at the completed part. Alright, here's the completed front frame now. When we go to put the servos in, it's kind of, they use those plastic U clamps that you screw into. So to get to them, you might want to leave this top radio tray bolts. You might want to leave the Loctite off of them for now, so you can take it off later, and makes it easier to get to the servos. Or if you want, while you're at this step, go ahead and install your servos, and it'll just make it easier in the end. You know, you can do it before you put this tray in, and then you'll have your servos already mounted. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these two together. As you can see, these two got like a puzzle piece fit, and they just kind of snap together. So I'm just going to put them together and set them aside for now, and we'll move on to working onto the tail next.